Welcome to Empower Her, the Help We Need podcast, where we explore topics that empower women and support their well-being. I'm your host, Fumike Moronkeji, and in today's episode, we shall be continuing with the career pillar discussion, where we're taking a dive into the workplace to address the question of the manager. In this second episode, we shall focus on the manager and them. We're looking at things from the lens of the manager, that is you. And we will answer some of the questions around that, such as, why do I have to work with such a difficult employee? Or how can I manage my direct report, who frankly is a pain in the neck type of questions? Again, this type of questions are an ever-going topic in the workplace. So don't think you are the only one dealing with it, or they're going to disappear into thin air, because they're not going to. As I mentioned in the first part of the Manager and You episode, the uniqueness I bring to this conversation is that of having to work with a difficult manager myself, and also coach managers to work with difficult employees. So hopefully my experience and guidance can help you a bit on your journey as you navigate this hurdle. So as a manager, I will be honest with you that in my career, I've had situations where I've had to work with difficult employees, right? And I would say that some were dramatic than others, but I learned to have some staying power, to be more empathetic, and I learned a lot about being patient and trusting the process to play out. So before we proceed, let me be clear. If you're a new manager, just navigating into the space of managing people, it's really helpful if you go through some skill training. It's helpful to get a mentor or a coach to support you in this new space of managing people and learning to walk through them. That's really important. So let's move on to addressing the question of your emotions first, right? And most times as managers, when we work with employees or we have a direct report who is difficult, I think honestly we feel entitled. We feel like if we had an opportunity, we'll just have them let go, just get them fired or something. But maybe the HR process is stalling the needed action because you need to follow some procedures of maybe putting them on an improvement plan. And as a manager, you yourself, you're dealing with a lot of things, right? You have deliverables to be met. There are other things that need to be done. And you look at this individual as a stumbling block. It's just a waste of time trying to get them to stay in line. And the emotions are really, really very frustrating. And if you had your way, you would not have them on your team. And I would like to say that I understand you, but I would also like to say that your feelings will not solve the problem. How you feel right now, like it should go away, how upset you are, it's not going to solve the problem. So while sometimes it may be true also that your direct report is not the best of persons to work with, and you feel like this is the worst nightmare ever, or I could not have asked for something so entangling and difficult. I believe that even in the process of working with someone to manage this difficult relationship, I think it comes with its merits as well, because there are a number of learnings along the way, learnings about that individual, learnings about yourself that you would find out about. So I think in the best of situations, it's always helpful to look for ways to address the difficult situation, obviously. So if you're looking for a way out, or at least you're trying to navigate this difficult situation, then please stay tuned in as I help you explore ways to resolve this issue, which is our main goal here, okay? And I hope you can benefit from some few tips that I will be sharing with you today. So, first of all, I would like for us to check what we're dealing with here as a manager by using the qualities of a parasite as our litmus test to see if your direct report or team member is showing up in these ways. And as a result, we could say they are truly exhibiting toxic behavior. Now, we all know what a parasite is, right? It's an organism that feeds off others without necessarily giving back. So in this scenario of a manager and them situation, your direct report should exhibit certain traits that reflects an exploitative relationship with you or with other members in the team or in the workplace. And the first trait could be dependence on others, right? This individual is seen as somebody that is heavily dependent on other people in terms of financial support, in terms of just emotional support, or they just want to be validated all the time. And it's becoming overwhelming. And, you start getting feedback that this individual, I don't know, maybe is always begging for money. Maybe they're always coming across as feeling less than, the way they're treated, or they're talking to other employees and making them feel like this company is the worst place ever. I would classify those individuals as highly disengaged, right? And you're getting the flag that they're going around and, causing some form of disturbance. So that's a red flag. Another trait could be just the lack of reciprocity. And what do I mean by this? I mean, do they come across as if they are needing to do a certain task or put on a certain project, they in turn, shove responsibility, or what would I say? They are not willing to support others, is probably the best way to put it. And that gives a sense of imbalance, right? Because certain of your team members would have to go on leave, may have to take a break off, maybe on sick leave or what have you. And you would expect that other team members would lend a helping hand to support them, and vice versa. So you see that this individual in question would always have people support them, but are not willing to support others. And they're always showing up with excuses as to why they're not able to do what they need to do in terms of, getting that extra responsibility, and just making excuses to say that they're not able to show up or do whatever. And you sense that if the case were reversed, they would be open to, obviously, you would need to get somebody to support to get their work done if they were off or on a sick leave or what have you. So that's another red flag, and it's something that you probably may need to start looking at. Another trait could be, are they manipulative? So what do I mean by this? Do they tend to control their relationship with others, especially members of the team? Maybe we'll see them as senior, or maybe we'll see them as they've been long in the organization, and, in terms of wanting to respect them, they tend to go above and beyond. Or could these people now start taking advantage of that and, blackmailing or emotionally blackmail? I've been here, I know people, I can speak to people, and creating crisis in that sense. and you having to sort of try and navigate to resolve certain conflicts. Or maybe you find out that certain people have resigned only to trace it back to them. So it's important that you take that as a serious red flag. Another trait could be emotional drain. So these individuals are constantly, seeking for attention and support, that it sucks the energy out of those around them and makes those around them feel exhausted and overwhelmed. And it's almost as if when they come into the room, they're always whining or complaining about something. Life has been hard. Life is so cruel. And, it's becoming like we can't do this anymore. So that's another red flag that you need as a manager to not overlook. And another trait could be avoiding responsibility. So we talked about reciprocity, where they need to stand in for a team member. In this particular scenario, they're avoiding to take responsibility for maybe decisions they should own, and frequently pointing fingers at others for the problem, and, it's constantly done on there's a pattern here, and it's becoming quite toxic. And maybe you have other team members reporting back to you saying that this person it's difficult to work with, they're not doing what they should do on time, they're not collaborating as they should, and this is impacting the work culture or the climate within the team. That's a red flag that you need to pay attention to. Another trait is a sense of entitlement, and it's interesting because you have colleagues who have been in a role for a while and they assume that they should be promoted, and maybe for whatever reason, they are still stuck in the role. In my particular example, I had a colleague who had to start reporting to me, and that was like a nightmare. And this colleague felt entitled, believing that they knew better, they've been in the organization. In my case, it was a bit unique, but they've not been in the organization longer than I was, but they were moved into the team and they still felt that they were entitled to the role I got, as opposed to me having a position. They were supposed to be the ones in that position. So, this leads to a form of resentment and frustration. It's often demonstrated in the way they respond, in the way they react. You can sense it and, you can feel it. And it's not just about them also. It also kind of tips back at you and, it causes conflict that in a normal situation can be avoided. That's a red flag. And that's something you need to be aware of. And then I would leave this last point or trait as creating dependency. So again, it's sort of leaning back to taking advantage of other team members in such a way that they're unable to say no. And they tend to flex and, bend beyond necessary to support this individual. And it almost seems as if they're always the ones giving, they're always the ones receiving instructions. And there's no balance, right? If I also need to work on a project where I need your support, they're nowhere to be found, or they're just icy cold. So always creating dependency when they need to get things done and not necessarily, helping to support others when necessary. So if you identify some of these traits, then in your team or direct report, you're most likely dealing with a difficult employee and you need to do something about it. So I think the big question on the table is, what are you going to do about it? So there are certain tips that we would walk through, and hopefully this helps. And one of such tip would be you need to address the issue promptly. You should not ignore the problematic behavior, because if you turn a blind eye, it's not going to go away. And most likely the behavior would worsen, and it would continue to demotivate your team, and it would impact their morale. So it's really important that you address the situation. You have a one-on-one conversation to talk to the individual, about the behavior. And it's really important that you stand up and you do something about it. And this leads me to other tips that we're going to talk about, because when you have that conversation, I think the most important thing is to seek to understand. Have an open conversation to identify, this is a behavior that has been flagged, and you want to understand why they're showing up the way they're showing up, because really there could be underlying issues, such as personal problems, dissatisfaction in the role, like I mentioned earlier, that could contribute to this difficult behavior or pattern. So it's helpful to listen actively and foster an atmosphere where you can engage and have them share, why they seem to be showing up in this way, and create that atmosphere where you're there to support them through the process. So I think while you may want to try and nip it in the broad kind of situation, I think it's helpful to be curious about the why. And when you're curious about the why, the other person who obviously is reporting to you is a human being, right? But they may not say, but they sense in the way you are curious about the why and how you want to provide support, that you are looking at them as an individual. It's not just about the job. You care how they are showing up, and you're trying to support them. So that's really, really very important. The second tip would be, when you're having these conversations, to focus on the behavior and not the personality of the individual. I know for some people, it could be overwhelming, and you just really want to tell them and give them the instructions and just let bygone be bygone. We're out of the room, take it or leave it, and that's it. And I think it's really very important. You are the manager. That's why you're the manager. And it's important that you show up as managing the situation. Don't forget that. So discussing the employee's behavior is important, but concentrate on specific actions, like, try and pinpoint. Rather than making personal judgments, you need obviously to come up with examples to really buttress while you're flagging the situation, so that you can connect it with a meeting with XYZ, with a feedback, to be able to substantiate your point. And do not focus on their personality or how they come across. So, for example, having a conversation with a difficult employee, you shouldn't be saying things like, I can understand that it's because you're so fast. That's why you're sluggish, and maybe that's why you're slow to meetings. I mean, seriously, that's a no. You, even if they are facts, you must never say that. It's a no-go area. Please don't do that. Don't body shame people. Don't talk down on who they are as an individual. It's so inappropriate, and you have crossed the line. And to be honest, I think it's just demonstrative of the manager being a bully. So please don't show up as a bully. And, it's always helpful for you to come into the room emotionally balanced. and be prepared for these conversations as opposed coming across as emotive and erupted. That doesn't really reflect the attributes of a good manager. And another example could be, talking to an individual and saying, I've heard this, I've heard that, this behavior is not acceptable, and this shows the kind of person you are, not trustworthy, you shouldn't be fit to work in an organization. Again, you're attacking the person, and you don't really know what's going on until you have those conversations, right? It could be a bad day for them. It could be they're going through a difficult time. It could be they're having a divorce. It could be they just lost a pregnancy. You don't know. So please do not be quick to label the behavior that you consider not appropriate and kind of sync that behavior with the individual and tell them you're bad. Right? We shouldn't be doing that as managers. And I think it's helpful to focus on the facts so that you avoid your direct report being defensive, right? Because when you start moving away from the facts, then they become defensive. The atmosphere is charged. You don't achieve the purpose of having that conversation to start with. So please encourage some constructive dialogue. You focus on the facts. You provide clear examples of the behavior that needs to change. And just moving on, I think it's helpful as you have those conversations to not just, be fluffy about it and then close it out. No, the reason you're in the room is to address the behavior and see it to a conclusion. You come up with actionable points so that the behavior is not repeated. That's the main dish, right? To ensure that you are nipping things in the bud and you're addressing that behavior, and you're ensuring that what is reflective after your conversation is productive. So it's important to outline your expectations for their behavior moving forward. You work with the employee to create a written plan, right? To include measurable goals and timelines for them to improve, and stating the consequences of failing to meet those expectations. I think it's helpful to add that in so they understand the seriousness, right? We're trying to address the behavior which is toxic, which impacts employee morale, which could be a form of disengagement to other employees within the organization. And that's what you really need to address so that the culture and the climate that you're creating is conducive. So I would suggest that after the conversations, after everything has been said and done, and you've agreed on an action plan, then you need to follow up with a formal email with the minutes of the meeting, detailing the things you've discussed and what you've agreed to. So in a sense, you stamp it and you could always refer to it in case the situation requires further attention and we are moving over now from mediating to escalating, right? So it's really important that you kind of nip things in that way. And obviously, through those conversations, and as you're having those conversations, offer support, explore resources within the organization. Ask the employee or your direct report, what do they think they need to improve in terms of their performance or the behavior? It's good. It's a two-way conversation, right? It's not you coming in and telling them what they need to do. It's them also reflecting and thinking, you know what? Yeah, I showed up not in a nice way. Maybe I would suggest that certain things could be done to support me as I go on and try and create a productive outcome. So it's helpful to listen to them and let them come up with ideas or suggestions that could include, training, mentoring, or resources like within the organization. If you have an employee assistance program where you have counselors that could speak to people or support them with their mental health or emotionally, it's important that you support them to explore those resources as available. So you need to tailor your support to specific needs that would obviously enhance their success. I think that's very important. And, we've talked about monitoring the progress, right? Well, no, we actually talked about the actions, but now you need to monitor the progress. So it's not about dishing it out and saying this is what you need to do, and then you wash your hands off and then you step back. No. You need to monitor the progress. After establishing a plan, you need to check in regularly with the employee's progress. You need to use feedback from coworkers, periodic evaluations to assess if they're improving and making the necessary adjustments as things evolve. And the other tip I would say is, as much as possible, you need to maintain professionalism, because throughout this process, as the manager, one of your main objectives, regardless of how the conversations go, is to remain calm and professional. Even when you're delivering the negative feedback, or even when the employee in question is responding in such a way that it's not necessarily the best way to respond, you need to show up, you need to be calm, you need to act professionally. That's part of your job, right? You're not paid to be reactive and scream, and that's not what a manager is supposed to do. So while a part of you may be screaming to do that, the part of you employed should be doing completely the opposite, right? So focus on the facts, avoid emotional reactions that could, possibly escalate into tension. And I believe that when you show up as the manager in the room, you will get a lot of respect and admiration from the other person at the end of the day, because if obviously what we're looking at is a productive outcome and we get there, that employee would feel seen, will feel heard, will feel cared for, and you get to win them back into the team as someone that's productive and willing to support and the organization's mission, vision, objectives, and goals. And I think that's really very important. So in terms of really the last straw would be, after all has been said and done and there's still no positive change, now this is when you need to involve HR. And I know that there's a tendency most times for people to want to pull in HR at the beginning. And that's really not the right way to do it, because you are the manager, you need to explore those options. And maybe you could also need the HR support to coach you through exploring that first option as well. But typically, HR should not be contacted to solve the problem and get rid of the employee. That should not be the initial mindset. It's more around, how do I manage the situation so that it doesn't depreciate further? So if the situation does not improve despite your best efforts, and then, bringing HR to provide further guidance or steps, or even necessarily, disciplinary actions, so that they can leverage additional resources and, ensure that the company policies are followed. So remember, the strength of you as a manager is not just in your job title. It comes with the ability for you to demonstrate leadership qualities, such as being empathetic and not erratic. While you cannot control your direct reports' behavior, you can at least control your own actions and your reactions. Again, by cultivating self-awareness and employing strategic, communication techniques, you can improve your working relationship and you can contribute to a healthy organizational culture and your team's culture as well. I hope these insights have been helpful. Leave a review or share your thoughts and let me know. And if you still need further information or support, feel free to contact me for a coaching call, and I'll do my best to help you through the situation. Continue to stay tuned in to the Help We Need podcast to live your best life. Don't forget to stay empowered and remember to empower health.